did different things. We went to major events, those being the Calgary Stampede, which shows off a certain type of culture in Alberta, a very cowboy culture, a very rodeo culture. We went to the South Country Fair, which is, for anybody who sees a film as a part of Alberta they don't know, is the alternative, the liberal, well, small liberal, not big L liberal, hippie culture. And then we obviously went to the Brocket powwow. And to engage in spontaneous interviews, it was us just talking to people, and also my wearing of the Brocket 99 t-shirt, which wasn't necessarily the safest thing to do, but I felt was the best thing to do to engage people in spontaneously, and also to show a lot of the feelings on this film when we were trying to get funding for it was the feelings that I was making this up and nobody had heard of this tape, and I was just trying to generate something that didn't exist. And our theory is like, well, if that's what you believe, the film clearly needs sections that show that you have a lot of people from many different backgrounds who know this tape throughout Canada, and you can go walk around and you'll find them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so we did. It worked.
And is there a specific group of people that was like more challenging to get to talk, or in general you will say people were, more,
Well, yeah, no, I think that we spent a long enough time to get a good, diverse group of people. I'd say that there is definitely in the film fewer women in the film than men's voices, and I'd also say that fewer women ever listen to tape than men. It definitely fed to men a lot more than females. Yeah, and minorities. There's fewer minorities or visible minorities or whatever that spoke to the tape. But yeah, it's if you put the time in, you'll find a good group of people, and that's kind of what we did. Take 42 days to shoot it. We did travel around to a lot of different areas and managed to encounter them. But yeah, some people would talk to you but would never talk to you on camera. And I think my editor had a good point, is the idea that I could get certain people to talk, and a lot of people bring up how I maybe because of my physical makeup, was able to broach the First Nations community in a way a white Caucasian, Caucasoid, whatever person could not have. Or alternatively, I always bring up, well, maybe though, because he's a fairly large, tall, white guy, maybe if you done it, you could have got the hardcore racists to do more interviews with you, because they see me and suspect I must hate the tape. So it's a hard call. I think anybody going to this is going to get different interviews, and the same on any project. And one of my advantages, though, was that I did grow up in a small town, and going into small towns, and like the rest of my crew, it's just not unfamiliar. I'm not bringing much to it other than I actually know these places from growing up, and not bringing any sort of I'm coming from big to small. It's more actually coming to where I grew up in a certain way and knowing how to live and be and how they are in that place. And that's an advantage, I think. Well, I think the question comes up about being a visible minority, and it goes both ways for people who, it's a tough film, it's a controversial film. I don't really understand why it's controversial to have people talking. Are the comment section on the Globe and Mail controversial, or are they just people expressing their opinion, and educated people and people of free will can listen to those and walk away with what they think rather than getting all up in a huff about the whole thing? But it comes up, it for sure comes up. People expect that because I'm a visible minority I have an issue with things, or people expect that, I have to, also as a visible minority, I've had comments, well, as a person of color, you should never present those racist opinions in your film. Like, well, why isn't it my responsibility as a person of color to not have a diverse discussion? I don't really come from a basis of visible minorityness. I now choose other on all the forums and write Can Indian instead of the Indo-Canadian, or I guess I'm South Asian now. The forums when I was young was East Indian, then it was Indo-Canadian, now it's South Asian. I just choose Can Indian and hope that I can get a job through that at this point. But yeah, it's a necessary question, I guess, from our people, and it does make sense. Like, I understand it, but I'm hoping, I don't know. Ultimately, if you grow up, I think most people who grow up in a minority culture know that there is no definition within that minority culture. It's just like when you're within a country looking at another one, you can generalize, but you know that there's a bunch of goofs and a bunch of great people in every culture. It's an absolutely useless equation, but it's multicultural.
So what is your own perception about the status of Aboriginals in this part of the country?
My perception of the status of First Nations, Aboriginals, Natives in this part, do you mean British Columbia, do you mean Lower Mainland, British Columbia? Well, you know, it's a different situation in BC than it is in most parts of Canada. We're essentially in a non-treaty relationship with First Nations. And so, which I'm sure you know that the First Nations of BC have only recently signed treaties, with Nisga'a being the first, and it looks like the Tsawwassen have voted and they're going to go ahead with a treaty of their own. So the situation, I think, is evolving, hopefully for the benefit of First Nations here, and the fact that our legal system here has recognized that we have to negotiate, and that goes obviously back to the proclamation of the Queen way back when. And we don't have treaties to back us up on any of our claims, so essentially, you know, if you want to go down that road, BC is unceded land, and everything's up for negotiation. So I hope, you know, I think like I do think like a majority of people in BC, both on a, you know, human rights and on an economic level, is that hopefully we can come to agreements, understandings, you know, truth and reconciliations that bring about, you know, a peaceful but also productive, happy, educated, non-prejudicial relationship with First Nations on terms that they put forward, that we can understand, rather than us setting the pace at this point. I think that's probably one of the main things, right, is us sort of letting them sort of work with us on how they want it to be. And I think there's a lot of chance in BC, even our recent government, who, when they were in opposition, had some of the most, you know, not very positive points about First Nations and treaty negotiations. They've come, like Premier Gordon Campbell has even come around. It's got a native name, ceremonial stuff now, and yeah, it's there's a chance that there could be a much better relationship. As for the rest of the country, you know, I think it's good you asked me a specific question, because every nation, I think, hopefully as Canada develops, they cannot recognize that every nation has to be talked to